Oh, here we go. It's time for another KCMN Presents Part 2 of some testimony hearings of the George Floyd case, the Derek Chauvin. Here we go.
Thursday in Derek Chauvin's murder trial. After less than 2 days of testimony, Chauvin is charged with murder in the death of George Floyd. And for the first time, he spoke at his trial. CBS News correspondent Jamie Yukas has more from Minneapolis.
Within the first 5 minutes of the court day, Derek Chauvin answered the question everyone has been asking.
I will invoke my Fifth Amendment privilege today.
The jury was not in the room for the rare sight. Chauvin's face unmasked, and it was the first time we heard his voice in court.
Is this your decision not to testify?
It is, Your Honor.
Number one, you have to decide, is this person going to be good on the stand?
Joe Tamburino is a Minneapolis criminal defense attorney, not associated with the case.
Why do you think he didn't decide to testify?
Because they did a risk-benefit analysis, and he and his attorney decided that the risks were too great.
The prosecution then tried to deflate an argument the defense made yesterday that carbon monoxide from the police car contributed to Floyd's death. They tried to introduce
get out of here. That's bullshit.
Discovered last night, but the judge said that wasn't fair to the defense and told them to tread lightly.
But if he even hints that there are test results that the jury has not heard about, it's going to be a mistrial. Pure and simple.
So prosecutor Jerry Blackwell carefully asked his questions, trying to point out the low level of carbon monoxide in Floyd's blood.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether this statement that Mr. Floyd's carboxyhemoglobin could have increased by 10 to 18% is reliable?
No, I believe it is not reliable.
Closing arguments start on Monday. Once the jury gets the case, they will be sequestered. As to how long they will be deliberating, the judge told them, plan for long, hope for short. Lana?
All right, Jamie, thank you. For more now, I'm joined by criminal defense attorney Arthur Aidala. Arthur, as we heard in Jamie's piece, it looks like we almost saw a mistrial called on Thursday. It had to do with new lab tests looking at the level of carbon monoxide in George Floyd's blood. Can you explain what happened here and why the judge threatened to call a mistrial?
Sure. So the rules of the game, so to speak, and I don't mean to say it as a game to make light of it, but the rules of evidence are the prosecution in their case in chief, before the defense puts any evidence on, they basically have to put on their full case. And then they rest, and that's what's called their case in chief. Then the defense goes, maybe or maybe not. Here, they did put on evidence. And then the prosecutor decided to call one rebuttal witness. Well, that witness was a doctor who had already testified. He was a pulmonologist having to do with George Floyd's lungs. And in between the time when the prosecution rested and then today, there was newly discovered evidence having to do with the carbon monoxide levels in George Floyd's lungs, or in his blood, in his body, I should say. And it had to do with the defense brought up the fact that maybe he's on the floor, the car is running, and carbon monoxide had something to do with the cause of death. What the judge said is, look, Mr. Prosecutors, you never brought this up on your case in chief. Don't you dare bring this up now. Don't even hint to it. And if you bring it up now, you try to sneak it in the back door, I will declare a mistrial, which means the trial is over, the jury goes home, and they do a whole redo. They start from the beginning. And now Eric Nelson, the defense attorney, would do a second trial and know everything that all the witnesses are going to say. He can totally be prepared. He can totally cross-examine them on their prior testimony. And it would be a tremendous advantage for the defendants. So obviously the prosecutor, when the judge gives that kind of an instruction, is allowed to speak to their witness beforehand and says, no matter what you do, don't bring up the newly discovered evidence. Don't bring up the carbon monoxide in his body, because that would be ruinous for our case.
Arthur, I know that the jury is given instructions to regard things and disregard other things. But given that this was a really dramatic moment in court,
I was just thinking too, if that was to happen in mistrial, do you know how much fucking anarchy and riots would be going around the country?
There are so many things in this case, Lana, that
Fuck yeah, because everybody's gonna look at it and say, oh, yeah, it's a mistrial, even though he's getting a new trial.
So much
a lot of people
pressure
think it's,
on
yeah,
them
guess
from
what? It's a fucking victory for the cops.
Parts of our
it's
community.
It's a fucking
all over
blow for fucking
the world, right?
Yeah, it's a low blow for George Floyd.
And this case, this is not a city case, a state case, a national case. It's an international case. I think the biggest influence on them is going to be that video. And you and I spoke about this last week. It's going to be where this case began, in the opening statements when they showed that video. And it's not just the visual part of it, but it's the audio where you have people, civilians, saying to a defendant, "You are killing this man. Get off of him. He's not breathing. He has liquid coming out of his nose and his mouth." Then you have a woman who identifies herself as a fellow public servant. "I'm an EMS worker.
Yep.
Let me just take his pulse." And the defendant doesn't allow that to happen. Then you see the EMS gurney come out, and at that point, he still doesn't get up. So I think that is going to be the biggest influence on this jury to come back with some sort of a conviction, as well as the events of the last couple of days that took place with the tragic homicide of that young man. They know that. They're not, they're going to be sequestered, Lonnie. You understand? Monday after the closing arguments, the judge will read them the law. They'll have their suitcase and they will go into a hotel, and they will not have access usually to their phones, to television, to radio, any of the outside world. That's not the case now. They know what's going on 10 miles away from their courtroom, their courthouse. And it would be naive to say that they don't feel the pressure of the results of their verdict.
Yeah, it's hard for us not to have the death of Daunte Wright playing and reverberating in our head as we're watching this trial.
Everywhere in the world where that could have happened, for it to happen 10 miles away, it's almost unbelievable.
Yep. That's the thing people were thinking about when they're watching George Floyd. They're thinking about Daunte Wright.
Thought about the
then that
case
13-year-old who got shot, killed by police in Chicago.
What do you think of the case that was presented by the defense? And what do you think both sides had as their most compelling arguments?
Well, I'm a former prosecutor. I'm a current criminal.
Yeah, it's like this, man. How many unarmed civilians have been shot, to make national headline news the last couple of years? First we had the Roy Oliver case. Then we had the Amber Geiger who shot an unarmed black man in his own apartment. Then you got the George Floyd. Then you got Breonna Taylor. Then you got Daunte Wright. And who knows who? Well, I'm gonna find out who this 13-year-old kid is. It's crazy. People are losing faith. They're losing their humanity for the fucking police officers these days. That's why people go and saying, no justice, no peace. I'm saying no justice, no peace. Fuck the police. Blue lives murder. Come on.
As a defense attorney, I will say that I thought Eric Nelson did the best that he could with what he had. And it was really a David and Goliath story. There were so many prosecutors. There were outside lawyers who volunteered for free to work for the prosecution. It was a real big team and a real big effort. And there was Eric Nelson with basically, I think, one assistant. And just to give your viewers a little inside baseball, this is exhausting stuff. Exhausting stuff. After the last major case I tried, I wound up in bed for a day, not really sick, but just exhausted. And I think Eric Nelson he identified the weakest points of the prosecution's case through the expert witnesses, through cross-examination of their witnesses, of their medical examiner who wrote a report, the medical examiner, the person who put his hands and examined George Floyd's body, who basically wrote down
argument will
he
be
had a heart
held Monday.
attack. He
Jury
didn't die of
deliberation will begin
asphyxiation.
after.
Now, the doctor hedged a little bit in his verbal testimony after he's been picketed. They've built a wall around his office. He got under so much pressure because he didn't just write asphyxiation. He basically wrote it in medical terms. He had a heart attack. Then the defense did call their own witnesses that said Mr. Floyd had a very large heart. He needed an extraordinary amount of oxygen to pump through his veins. So I think the defense did the best with the evidence that they had, cross-examining the experts and putting their own experts on and highlighting the fact that there may very well have been, there is a reasonable doubt that something else besides Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's body caused his death.
So, Arthur, were you surprised, though, that the defense wrapped up so soon? And I can't let you go without getting your assessment of the decision regarding putting Chauvin on the stand.
I was a little surprised they called as few witnesses as they did, only because Eric Nelson, I believe it was yesterday or the day before, he made a strenuous objection saying that the prosecution kept calling all these experts who were saying the same thing over and over again, which is basically the jury's job. These experts are basically saying, yes, the knee to the neck killed him, the knee to the neck killed him. They're allowed to have some help from an expert, but that's their job. The jury has to determine that. That's the cause of death. And to allow, I think it was 6 experts to testify to the fact that the jury's supposed to decide, Eric Nelson objected to it. So I was anticipating him putting on a few more witnesses because he had 15 medical experts on his witness list, and he only wound up calling 2 experts. So I was anticipating to have at least 1 or 2 more just to kind of pile on. That the word in the courtroom is bolstering, which is usually you object to that, but if the prosecutor's going to do it, then the defense can do it. In terms of Mr. Chauvin not testifying, I can't say I was shocked by that. It's not like this is a he said, she said case, and he's explaining what happened behind closed doors. I don't know what he would have said. The only one who does know that is Eric Nelson. And Lana, in the cases that I've handled, sometimes it's a very difficult decision to make. Because what happens is once the defense puts on a case, and especially puts on the defendants, the burden of proof, which is supposed to be on the prosecutor, shifts. And all of a sudden the jury says, okay, who do we believe more? The prosecution's witnesses or the defense witnesses? And that's not supposed to be that's not how it works under the law, but that's how it works under human nature. Who do we believe more? So I'm not surprised that they came to the conclusion. Only Eric Nelson and Derek Chauvin know why he actually didn't testify. But the jury is going to be instructed by the judge, don't hold that against him. The burden of proof is on the prosecutor. They don't have to prove anything to you. He doesn't have to tell you what happened. That's the prosecutor's job, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was assaulting George Floyd. He was intentionally assaulting him, and while he assaulted him, he caused his death. And that way, if you find that evidence to be proven to you beyond a reasonable doubt, you find him guilty of murder in the 2nd degree. And that's what the prosecutor wants.
All right, Arthur Aidala, thank you.
Well, there you have it. It's more news about the George Floyd case and the trial. All right, I'm out of here. Mike Chuck. Peace out.